Hello and welcome to A Wealthy Life. My name's Vicky Washay. In this episode, we're going to be looking back at history as a way to remind us of how much we can learn, but also how much or how far we have come, how far we've traveled. This is absolutely crucial, I believe, in recognizing the value of where we are now, learning the lessons of the past, improving on what we've done. But I think it's also about the insights that you're going to get individually, both as a listener, as potentially a property investor, as someone who wants to build a wealthy life for themselves. Whatever your path, there are massive lessons to be learned from history. And I'm absolutely convinced that this episode is going to add some whoosh to your life. Enjoy. Hello and welcome. My name's Vicky Washay. This is going to be a more unusual episode in that I sort of want to shake up your thinking a little bit. If you know anything about me, you'll know that I love history, great fan of historic royal palaces, of which we're members. Look at the way that women have been treated over history and the changes that came with Henry VIII, all of that sort of stuff. And I've really been thinking about a sentence one of my mentors spoke about and what that means for women, for men, for our stereotypes. And that's really what I want to tap into today, because I think that we're reaching a point where we might not be aware of it, but we're coming to a point where we need a dramatic shift, bringing up to the consciousness a conversation that changes the stereotypes that we have been locked into for generations that actually serve no purpose. And I think that's what we can do. We can learn so much from history. It teaches us to understand what we've previously not been conscious of. For example, about how world events affect the way we live, not just because of physical changes in geographic boundaries, but also changes in our thinking at a different level. We can look at how once upon a time women were political pawns. They were effectively sold into marriages. There was a dowry that went with them, a payment that went with them. They were sold into marriages that were for political gain and for power, not as individual human beings. And then they had nothing of their own. They possessed nothing. And if you then look at periods of conflict, when we've had war, what difference that makes. So, for example, during and after periods of conflict, there are, and there's certainly plenty of that around, both literal wars and growing divisions. The role of men mostly has been to go to war, and why they're going to war is because they are the protectors. They're deemed to be stronger, more physically able. But when they come back, they have been through experiences that no one who hasn't been to war can ever imagine. And they need a form of normalcy, a form of certainty. And that's really understandable. And I remember as a child having friends who had joined the army and went over to Ireland during the conflicts, and they just can't come back and talk about what they've experienced, what they've seen, the unimaginable horrors that they have experienced. What they need is just normal life. They don't want any of that. They just want normal life just to be able to carry on. But if we look at the Second World War, for example, during that period, while the men were going off and experiencing dramatic periods in their lives, women were too. Women stayed here. They had to step up. They became the land women. They took on roles that were vacated by the men that were conscripted. But of course, once the men came back, they were in a position where they were no longer needed. In a sense, they had to reverse gear. They had to go back home. But they'd been in positions where they were in charge of things, making things, engineering, either on the line or in roles where they were taking controls of maybe teams. And all of that changed as the men came home, and their need, and frankly, that was a huge need, because we needed to reintegrate all of these people that had been involved in this horrendous experience. If you then think of those children, quite probably your grandparents, that sort of age, they will have been aware of tensions in the family, probably in society, but at an unconscious level, not able to have that conversation because It was new, this sort of awareness that women could be or do more. That generation of women, your grandmothers, will have ventured into the workforce. Their children will have been in the workforce, potentially even creating their own businesses, maybe supported by fathers and husbands. I know my grandmother never did anything, but my mother started her own business when she was in her early 20s, and they would have been of that generation. So those women who are basically the grandchildren of the land women would be acting as they always did in the workplace. I don't think my mother thought it was unusual for her to have a job, to work in the workplace. But in fact, she was probably unaware that she was fighting to regain ground that generations before her had already had. That responsibility and respect that women had had during the war is now something that those children are having to take on and fight for again. Now, some of the issues are biological, quite frankly. You know, women are the ones to carry children. We can't get away from that. If you want to have children in your life, then the woman somewhere along the line is going to have to be pregnant and carry those children. But also, usually, it is the woman that then takes on the main caring role for them. Now, is that because the male partner earns more? Or is that just because that is what's assumed? Or that's because it's a biological imperative? But if you think about it from an employer perspective, women are, and I hate to say it like this, less reliable because children don't get sick on planned days. You can't book in, oh, sorry, I need next Wednesday off because my son or my daughter's going to be sick. They tend to get sick overnight. And so you ring up that next morning and go, I can't come in. And that creates stress for business, a level of unreliability. And it's very difficult to separate the stress in the business from the person who caused you the stress. And therefore, when you have women who then start to have children in your workforce, you've got those concerns of, can I rely on that woman to come to work tomorrow, or might her child be sick? And so you've got to have that extra level of thinking in your business. So that takes us from a point where historically women have had responsibility and to a point where that slipped back a little. Now they're fighting for it again, and now they're in the workplace because of the biological imperative to have children and the responsibilities that come with that. Sometimes women can be seen as less reliable, and sometimes you will see women stereotypes of the power dressers with the suits in the high-powered jobs, and they will frequently be women that do not have children. And is that because in order to be taken seriously, some women feel that they can't have children because otherwise that's considered a difficulty? I listened to something the other day where someone was talking about taking their business forward for funding, and one of the partners is pregnant and they're keeping it secret because funders, financial organizations, and investors would consider that business a lot differently if they knew one of the key partners was pregnant. Now, we would never say that about a man. Oh, the man of this business, he's about to become a father. Does that make him less reliable? Should we not fund in his business because he's going to be a father? It doesn't work the same way, does it? So it's interesting to see this. So now let's think of the men, the grandsons of the men who've been to war. They may be unconsciously aware of all of this historic energetic shift that's gone on, but they may also be aware that women are capable of much more. They may have felt some of that turmoil. They may be aware that their fathers and their grandfathers were affected by this shift going on. I don't believe anyone wants to hold anybody back. But if your whole sense of worth, especially as a male, is as a protector, as a provider, and this is a classic male archetype, particularly in that post-war period, and now that role has changed and you're no longer needed as the protector because the war's over and the women have realized that they're stronger and more capable of anything that they ever thought of themselves before, women have even started to earn their own money, then what is the role for a man? It's not to be the provider anymore. And I know when I first created this podcast, my first couple of podcasts were the fact that there are still men who consider themselves to be the financial protectors, who have to take on that role, and women who either see themselves or are considered as the family nurturer. And I sat on the train last night and I listened to this rather posh couple coming back from London. They were a little bit pickled. And the conversation went something to the effect of the man was saying, he was flicking on his phone, he was saying, oh, I need to just check that there's money in the bank tomorrow because the credit card bill is going to be paid and it comes out automatically and I want to make sure the money's there. And the woman went, don't worry, darling, I trust you. I don't need to know about that stuff. You can imagine I was just sitting there, my overwhelming urge to tap her on the arm and go, actually, you very much do need to know about that. Because what if this man or you decide that this relationship isn't working and you break up and you've got no idea about money? How are you going to survive? Why should your husband or your male partner or your partner be responsible, solely responsible for providing and monitoring the income and expenses of a business? I don't believe that's the point of a man. But then if we think about what is the role of the man, what is the new man's role? Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying there is no point to a man, but I do believe that the stereotypes have shifted. The idea of the strong man and the fragile, fainting woman is well, it always has been a myth, a make-believe that we've both adopted, probably because society, and I would also say fashions of the time demanded it. But as that old reality is shattering, naturally, some are going to want to maintain it. But as that old reality is shattering, where does that leave men now? So if you could imagine having a time machine, oh, I love a time machine. If I could only have a time machine, I would be the happiest little bunny, just zooming up and down the historical timelines, looking at how things change. I just think it's fascinating. And I hope you are too. But if you had that time machine, where does it leave us? Where's this role for men? What's their role, their status, their purpose? Because the historic version, the historic role and purpose is under threat. Women know they're capable of more. They still feel undervalued, but they have the feeling that they need to stand up for themselves. So do we fight or do we cooperate in this process? Now, if you're a man and you take it from the position that your historic role and purpose is being attacked by women wanting to step up and be all that they can be, you're going to take a defensive position or potentially an aggressive position. If you're a woman who is then faced with men either defending their positions to be more superior or being aggressive, trying to keep you down, then we're going to find ourselves in a position where we're fighting, and that's going to help absolutely no one. Now, a lot of people have evolved in their thinking, either consciously or unconsciously, but others are stuck. And that's where this concept of history emerges again. So I mentioned that a mentor of mine used the term empire a little while ago, and they were using it to describe a shift in businesses. And I've been grappling with this concept, this word, and actually thinking that it's a trigger for a much bigger change for me. It feels like a bigger change. Not that a shift in business isn't a big change anyway. So what does empire mean? So if we start off, we can think of it as one tribe fighting and beating another. The tribe that wins gains the territory, gains the land, the wealth, and their tribe, their people do well. They're protected, they're happy, they're wealthy, they're safe. Outside of this empire is the conquered territory. And the people there are vulnerable to attack because they're not protected by the mass within. They may be struggling to survive. They may not be happy. They may not be healthy and well fed. Now, all of that thinking is a very two-dimensional, geographically based concept. But if you now add in the notion of the internet and the social media and the way things have just changed in the last 20 years, changed beyond all recognition, if you think about it. 40-year-olds stopped using phone boxes. 30-year-olds learnt to text on their phones and got very flexible thumbs, and 20-year-olds swipe with their fingers. Your friends are no longer just people that you met through school. And quite frankly, while you might stalk them on social media, you're probably not friends with them. The people you're friends with may well be people that you have met online. Your partner may not be from the same community as you, may not even be from the same country as you. I remember when my mother met my father and he was an Italian, I was the only child in school that had a foreign parent. Now we're also intermingled. It's almost as if we're not really strangers anymore. Empire based on geography is completely over. What on earth has that got to do with female financial resilience, or property investment, or you even? It's a time of new thinking, and that's what I want to get you to that point. We've been having new thoughts basically since the war. For the last 70 or 80 years, we've just not been consciously having them because we've not been speaking about them. And that's what I want to do. I want to bring this into our conversation. I want us to dump old stereotypes. Men have been changing for years, but they've been derided in the past as metrosexual men, as if that was less than a man. It was very definitely a derogatory term. But actually, for me, metrosexual man describes someone who has left behind the need to be this protector architect, that they're comfortable in the new archetype that they're creating for themselves. And if we want to use the term metrosexual, that's absolutely fine. But someone who is comfortable in themselves, they don't have to put anybody else down in order to feel confident or comfortable in who they are. I look at friends and clients and I see so many more balanced partnerships now where the couple coming together are a team. They're not just a financial provider and a little woman at home. Businesses have changed, and we know that too. So the whole lockdown period, I think, really made a difference there. It was a catalyst for helping us to appreciate just how hard it is to work and have a family. Many men joined their partners at home, working from home, while the kids played in the other room, if you were lucky, and learnt and yelled. But now we don't have to work in these physical locations. We can work wherever we choose to work. And so we need to take another step forward. We need to make a shift to start talking about money, finances. So we know that we don't need the old stereotypes of old. We can appreciate each other for the roles that we have and the contributions that we make in the partnerships that we have that are unattached from historical archetypes. And now what we need to do is take that conversation forward from, yes, this is business. Business is hard. Business doesn't have to be geographically based. We can be a partnership. Now let's talk about money. And I keep thinking of the word equality, and equality is really a very strong, a very evocative word. It sort of implies that there is a battle behind it. But then when I was thinking about the word balance, well, it's actually a powerful word, I think. It doesn't seem to carry enough weight. Balance somehow feels mediocre. It feels like a settling for. So I want to use the word equality, but without the meaning of a battle behind it. And what I'm saying is that we need financial equality, culturally, societally, work-based, everything, because without financial equality, one another's lives are going to be so much more challenging. And what that means is that women cannot afford to abdicate financial responsibility like that woman on the train. We need to be in a position where we can earn, save, and invest independently. And why am I saying women need to earn, save, and invest independently. Because without that financial independence, you can't make informed decisions. I also met just recently someone, and she's going to join us on the podcast in a short while, who was effectively forced into a marriage as a child at the age of 16. And you can't get out of a relationship that might not be healthy for you, quite frankly, probably healthy for either of you, if you do not have the money in order to support you to make decisions. So this isn't all about, okay, we need financial resilience, so women in men in unhappy relationships can get divorced. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about if you have financial independence and you're taking equal shares, then some of the stresses that are in the relationship won't be there. And therefore, maybe the pressures that happen in relationships and cause them to fracture won't be there. Being present in a relationship, confident of your own financial resilience, regardless of what the future might bring, will actually help you become a more equal partner in that relationship. And men don't need to see this as a threat, but as a good thing. I'm going to talk more about financial resilience next week, but I want to leave you with this idea that if all women were financially independent and strong, both before, during, and after their relationship, then partners, particularly men, will start to see the benefits. The weight of taking on financial responsibility would not be there. It would be a shared responsibility. The pressure will be off them. And one of the things I spoke about in that very first podcast was how very many men I speak to who are unhappy. They're either unhappy in the job because they're missing their family or they don't feel fulfilled, or they're unhappy because they feel the weight and the responsibility of providing for a family and don't feel like they can cope with that on their own. And they really want to have that opportunity to speak to others. It will remove the financial devastation of a divorce or a separation on a relationship, because they'll become a thing of a past. We won't need the stress. And if the relationship does end, we won't need the fighting, because everybody will be strong in their own right. We won't have to be fighting for, I want this and you want that. Female financial resilience empowers both men and women. And women in turn can go on and empower the next generation and all future generations. So let's start talking about financial resilience for men and for women. Although I am just going to caveat that with especially for women, because most have got a longer distance to travel and a harder journey to get there because wages are lower and, let's call it, employer respect might not be as strong for them. I think it's a really fascinating conversation. I'd love to have your views. I'd love to know what you think about this episode. It's something that's really on my mind, and it's quite interesting that I have been brooding over this on and off since probably, I don't know, 2009, this idea of supporting women to become more financially resilient. That doesn't mean to say that I am not all for supporting men and couples to be financially resilient. I think we all need to be in a place where we understand how much money we need. We know where that money is coming from. We're confident of the source, if we can do that, and that we are in charge of our finances. And that links me back to this other idea of unconscious spending. And I've spoken about that before, this idea that everything to do with this blinking phone that we carry around with us all the time, every advert on there is designed to separate you from your money. And if it separates you from your money, you have to go back to work. You have to trade your time. You have to have your job. You have to work to get a wage to pay for the stuff. And there's this sentence, isn't there? And I can't remember where I've heard it now, that we're all spending money that we don't have to buy stuff that we don't need, to impress people we don't care about. And if we break that cycle and we start to actually focus on financial resistance as our modern empowerment of men, women, families, and children and future generations, then we're going to be in a position where we're going to create a healthier society, that instead of an empire that is geographically based and bound, and if you're in you're lucky, and if you're out, you're not. We will be, I don't know what an open empire would be. The empire would be the entire world. We would all be on the inside. None of us would be on the outside. And it saddens me when we hear stories of those that are left behind and those that are on the outside and those that are struggling. And that's really what I want to end with. Sort of wandered off into a miserable bit there. So, but I hope that listening to this, I've been able to put some whoosh into your thinking, that I want to challenge you and get you thinking about, am I playing to the stereotypes? Am I abdicating responsibility in my finances to my partner? Am I taking on the responsibilities and maybe even disempowering my partner the other way around? What stereotypes are you playing, and are they serving you? Is there some more, I don't say this like this, but more modern thinking rather than the historical stereotypes? Is there a new way that you can think about your role that is more empowering and more in keeping with the society that we live in now? And what could you be doing to become more financially resistant? And that's what I really want to look at. How can you be more financially resilient going forward? Because financial resilience means less stress. Less stress means more joy. It means a wealthy life. And that's what I wish you, of course. Thank you very much for listening, and I will be speaking to you again soon. My mission is to help people like you understand what a wealthy life truly entails. Together, we'll identify your ideal lifestyle, leverage your resources to generate the necessary income through property investment, whether by teaching you how or by managing the process on your behalf. Let's inject some momentum into your wealthy life plans as you subscribe now to capture every episode of the podcast, and then get in touch via my website, book a call. All of the details are in the show notes.